Good evening. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you. Of course, many of you don't know who I am, so it would be pertinent to give you some context. My name is Hindol Sengupta. As you heard, I've only started recently living in America. I was living in India till about 2 months ago. I work as a journalist. At the moment, I'm a fellow at Columbia University. I'm a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, which is where the entrepreneurial bit comes from. I wrote 8 books. My last couple of books, which some of you may have heard of, is a book called Being Hindu, which was published by Penguin in 2015. It's just out in America with Rowan and Littlefield. Then I wrote a book about Swami Vivekananda called The Modern Monk. And my last book, which I wrote just before I left India for America, was on Guru Gobind Singh called The Sacred Sword. All of them, of course, with Penguin. I have spent a large amount of my last decade of work in trying to understand why one should be Hindu at all. And I want to begin by telling you a little story about how this came about and why on earth did I get interested in it. Because most of my early work was entirely on economics, entrepreneurship. I'm a free markets proponent on the free markets and so on and so forth. It so happened that in the summer of 2014, 2013, I began to get interested in one fundamental question, which is, why should one be a Hindu? Why am I Hindu? Why do I call myself a Hindu? And to me, the fact that my ancestors were Hindus, my grandparents were Hindus, my parents were Hindus, was not enough. It was not even enough for me that I had been given the mantra by the Ramakrishna Mission. 3 generations of my family have been with the Ramakrishna Mission. We've always been part of the Ramakrishna Mission. We've always been associated with the Ramakrishna Mission. And I was given Diksha at the age of 10. But in my 30s, I began to ask myself the question, what is it about Hinduism that I should be engaged with at all? Why do I call myself a Hindu? Why don't I just call myself an atheist? Why don't I call myself of any other religion if I follow that religion? Why do I call myself a Hindu? Why does it interest me at all? I got the answer to that question when I announced to my old publishers, who had published me for many years, that I wanted to write a book called Being Hindu. The first response I got was that is the one single thing I could do to destroy my career in the 30s. If I wanted to destroy my career in my 30s, which I built assiduously over many years, the one thing that I could do to destroy my career was, of course, to write a book called Being Hindu. Because how, of course, as an Indian writer living and working in India, could you write a book called Being Hindu? That would be terrible. It would be a horrible, horrible thing. And everybody told me in Delhi that you must never write this book because, if you write this book, this is the end. You have a long career ahead. Where will you go after this? You might not be able to keep your job. No institution might take you. You might not be able to pay off your loans and so on and so forth. That convinced me, of course, that I must write a book called Being Hindu. And that's what I published too. When I decided that I have to write a book called Being Hindu, people told me, oh fine, all right, if you must write it, well, you have to self-publish it, right? Because obviously nobody will publish your book. Who in India publishes a book called Being Hindu, right? Come on, really. And that turned out to be, lo and behold, true, because even though I had written a whole bunch of books, even though I was the youngest person ever in the history of the Hayek Prize, which is given in the memory of the Nobel laureate Friedrich Hayek, still I realized a whole bunch of publishers would not publish my book because it was called Being Hindu. My publishers who had published my earlier books would not publish a book called Being Hindu. My agent, I've had an American agent for a long time, my agent grew steadily more and more worried because here I was, hell-bent and stubborn on writing this book, and no publisher would publish it. We went to the Jaipur Literature Festival, where we had been many times before, and I still remember we had a very worried meeting between my publisher and me. I was speaking at the Jaipur Literature Festival, and she was there. She had flown down from America, and she sat down with me and said, Well, what do we do about this book? Nobody will publish it. Then it so happened that after many years of trying and working, after many months, of trying and working, Penguin decided to publish the book. When Penguin decided to publish the book, a whole bunch of people told my editor, how can you publish this book? My editor was also, or is also in her 30s. They told her, how can you publish this book? If you publish this book, of course, this means it's the end of your career. First it was the end of my career, now it became the end of my editor's career. Because of course if you publish a book called Being Hindu in India, that is the end of your career. Let me tell you why I was so stubborn on publishing this book. In 2011, I made the fatal and dangerous mistake of trying to walk into a restaurant in Delhi, in Greater Kailash, some of you might know the place, called Urban Pint. That restaurant threw me out, and if you Google, you will find that I wrote about this in the newspaper called The Hindu. But why did Urban Pint throw me out? Because I made the dangerous and fatal mistake by trying to walk into Urban Pint wearing a kurta pajama. And the people there said, but we can't let you enter. And I said, why? You know me. I come here, I work in the vicinity. I mean, why would you not let me enter? Because they said, this is against our clothing policy. And I said, why would it be against your clothing policy? What am I wearing that is terrible? They said, no, well, we have to maintain a particular image of our restaurant and our establishment. And I was like, what image would that be? Because clearly I'm wearing Indian clothes in India. They said, well, this is not really the image that we want to portray about our establishment. Well, so I wrote this piece called Indian Anyone, asking if anybody in India wanted to be Indian. And that taught me, from that day onwards, in India, if any of you ever meet me in India, I wear the dhoti a lot. And the question that I'm often asked, even today, after several years of wearing dhoti all the time, people always are startled in India, mind you, when I begin to talk, and inevitably somebody will ask me this question, inevitably, I mean, how do you speak English so well? And I'm like, oh, what do you mean? I was educated in the English language. I mean, I went to school, right? I mean, and I went to college. I mean, what do you mean? And they're like, no, you mean, when we saw you, I mean, it sort of, I mean, clearly you speak English. I'm like, yeah, well, clearly I do speak English. Imagine that. Really. It's a matter of great astonishment for many Indians that somebody wearing Indian clothes can speak the English language, even in 2017. Where does it all come from? Why am I telling you all these stories? I'm trying to paint a picture before you on why I wanted to write a book called Being Hindu, and connect that to why we are where we are, where we come from, and where we ought to be going. Why are a lot of Indians so surprised in 2017 if they see an Indian wearing Indian clothes, especially the dhoti, and speaking good English? They're astonished because of a particular reason. And for that reason, let me go back 30 years. I was in school, and Being Hindu begins with this incident. I was in school in Calcutta, which is where I grew up. I'm Bengali. And in Calcutta, I went to at that time, one of the most elite and poshest schools in Calcutta. And in that school for 14 years, I was taught that there is no hope for me, because I was obviously a sinner. Why was I a sinner? I was really intriguing. As a schoolboy, what do you know? But it was very intriguing that I was a sinner and I was doing all these sinful things, but I had no idea that I was doing all these sinful things. Until one day, I think I must have been in class 10 or 9 or something, when something clicked in my head. Because as a schoolboy, what do you know, right? You go every morning, you're told you're a sinner, you're like, okay, well, whatever, right? What happened that morning was very interesting, because there was this pastor who was telling us with great fervence that all of you will go to hell, and this is a great sin, and idol worship is terrible, and all of that. And it ended after this long-winded whatever telling us all that we were all sinners. It ended, and then somebody handed, at the end of this sequence, it was always a thing in my school that the announcements would be made. So somebody handed the pastor a sheet of paper, and the pastor said, well, I have to read out the announcements now, and from tomorrow onwards, we'll be expanded by a day, or brought forward a day, of the Durga Puja holidays. And it occurred to me that for 1 hour I've been hearing that worshipping idols would make me a sinner, I would go to hell, and we would begin from the next day a 10-day jamboree of, guess what? Worshipping idols. And that connection did something in my head. It caused some imbalance in my head. And I began to wonder, what on earth is going on? Why am I a sinner? Why am I doing all these evil, terrible things? What does it mean, and why am I not getting better? If I'm such a sinner and I'm doing all these horrible, terrible things, why am I not becoming better? What's going on with me? So I began to ask all these terrible questions which you're never supposed to ask in India, because what will your career be if you ask these questions, right? I mean, obviously, everybody knows that, right? Then it all added up when I began to write this book on one fundamental question. That fundamental question relates to a word that all of you use all the time. And that word is culture. All of you and all of us, we are so concerned about upholding something called culture, right? What is this culture? What is culture, ladies and gentlemen? Anybody, if I may throw this question at the audience, what is culture? Why are we so hell-bent on keeping up something called culture? What is culture? Anybody? Your values. Anything else? It's a way of life. Where do these values and way of life come from? Where do they originate? Where did you get this way of life? Did you wake up one morning and find a way of life? Where did these values come from? From the? From your parents and from your elders and from what they have told you. And where did your parents and elders get all these values and culture, these thing called culture from? Where did they get it from? Where did their parents? And from their parents, from the Vedas, somebody said, and from their parents. Now tell me, how did your parents or their parents' parents understand that something called culture was in something called the Vedas? Who told them that? How did they? Did they wake up one morning and realize there is something called the Vedas and there is something called culture and we must go to this place called the Vedas and get them from there? Who told them that? Education. Wonderful. We're coming closer. Go, excellent. My argument to you would be that culture is only memory. That's the only thing culture is. A culture in a civilization is memory. Values is individual memory. Culture and civilization is collective memory. And a nation, if I may say so, is nothing but the amalgamation of this collective memory. A nation is what you and I remember. A culture is what you and I remember. It begins with our memory. It is what we remember about ourselves. Very soon in America, where all of you live, you're going to celebrate Thanksgiving, right? Thanksgiving is the memory of how Americans see one incident, right? In Africa they say, as long as the lion doesn't write history, it'll always be the hunter whose history will be written. It's always about memory, ladies and gentlemen. Culture is nothing but memory. It is what you remember. It is what my parents remembered from their parents and from their parents. And of course we understand these things well as Hindus, because how else did our culture get passed on from generation to generation, from thousands of years, but through memory. Long before we began to write any of these things, we memorized it. It was there in our memory. I just wrote this essay, tracing back the mother goddess worship, because it was Durga Puja and Navaratri. Do you know that it goes back to 30,000 years, and some would say even 250,000 years. If you Google it, you'll see it. But at least 30,000 years we know. We know that mother goddess worship goes back 30,000 years. How? And you will be surprised when you see the iconography from Anatolia, from things that have been found in other parts of the world. When you see those structures, The imagery is strikingly same. As a Bengali, I see that imagery and I'm like, oh, of course I know this. Why? There's a woman with a steed. What is that steed? It's always a lion. Often the hair of the woman, the goddess, the mother goddess, is curly hair. Anybody who's Bengali will know that the traditional imagery of Durga Ma is always with curly hair. It's always been. We have always seen this from our childhood. Of course, today it's fashionable to call any of this as pagan. Let's not forget. This is all pagan, right? But here's the fun thing. Paganism is back in fashion. And let me tell you why it's back in fashion. What is the one, many of you may have worked or work in technology, right? What is the biggest thing that will transform our world in the years to come? What is the one thing that you probably, well, don't have today a lot? Maybe you think you have, but will definitely not have. And every day you realize this, by the way. What is that one thing that you won't have in the future, which you probably also don't have today? Somebody said peace. It's interesting. It's interesting. In Bangalore also, by the way, they said peace. But anyway, anybody? Well, my argument is choice. Let me tell you why. We all believe in free will, right? This elusive thing called, we're all choosing this, that, and the other. Well, every time you use Amazon, ladies and gentlemen, Amazon shows you it's not your choice. It's what the algorithm determines on your past purchases that determines what you're choosing today. It's not your free will. And if you read all the new research that's coming out, the biggest question that we face today is the question of choice. Because in the future, data, or what we call dataism,
keep going.
What we call dataism will convert this one thing that you will not have, or will change this one thing that you will not have, which is choice. How will you get this choice? Well, the historian Yuval Noah Harari has made this argument that you can only have it by knowing yourself. And what is the, Swami Vivekananda used to say this, what is the one thing that stands at the bedrock of Hinduism? Know yourself. Even if you don't know anything, know yourself. You must know yourself. Where will you find God? Well, if you know yourself. Where will you find the answer? If you know yourself. Even today, every time you go to the Vedanta Center in New York, this is the message they say every single time. Where will you find the answer? By knowing yourself. There's this wonderful story, ladies and gentlemen, told of the interaction between an Indian sadhu and Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is obviously conquering the known world, and he's on the bank of the Indus, right, the river Sindhu. So Alexander is extremely young, and he's conquered the entire known world, and if he crosses Sindhu, the river Indus, and conquers what lies beyond Indus, he will be the greatest warrior ever in the history of mankind, because he would have conquered the whole of the known world, right? So he's on a horse, and he comes to this tree, and a sadhu is meditating under the tree. Alexander looks at the sadhu and says, what on earth is this chap doing, sitting under a tree? What is he doing with his eyes closed? He gets off the horse and he goes up to the sadhu and says, what are you doing? And the sadhu opens his eyes and says, what are you doing? And Alexander has never been asked that question before, because he's Alexander of Macedonia, right? And Alexander says, what do you mean? I'm Alexander of Macedon. I am conquering the world. And he says, but what are you doing? And the sadhu says, I'm conquering myself. And Alexander laughs at the sadhu, and the sadhu laughs at Alexander, because you see, this is two ways of looking at the universe, because what Alexander has been taught is that there is only one life. And what happens in that one life? Either you're a hero or you're not a hero. If you are a hero, at the end of your life, you cross over the river and go into that great place where all the heroes live. And then you meet your great heroes, Hercules and Odysseus and all of these people. What has the sadhu learned, ladies and gentlemen? That the end product is not a place for heroes. It is neither heaven nor hell. As Swami Vivekananda reminded us every single day of a short but wonderful life, it is liberation. The search is not for heaven or hell, it is liberation. And that liberation, and that idea of liberation that holds us together from this from the answer that I should have given in my school, that we are not sinners, we are, as Swami Vivekananda said, we are divine, we just don't know it yet. If you sum it up, Swami Vivekananda's one great message is that you are not a sinner. You are divine, it's just that you don't know it yet. It's the same thing that we have, which is, every lecture I give, at the end, always somebody raises the hand and then gets very angry and says, we don't have this, we don't have this, we don't have this. People say all these are nasty things about us, and people abuse us and da-da-da. Koi kuch kyun nahi karta? Always, in every lecture, koi kuch kyun nahi karta? Why doesn't somebody do something? And my answer, at least for the last few lectures, have been, koi kaun hai? Who's the koi? Who is this elusive koi who will come and save us, right? Who is this koi? And I haven't been able to find that koi. And I asked this to a monk of the Ramakrishna mission one day. And I said, Maharaj, they keep asking me, koi kuch kyun nahi karta? And he said, monks of the Ramakrishna mission are always extremely erudite, and it's a great joy talking to them. He smiled and patted me on the shoulder and he said, you should quote Barack Obama to them. So I said, Maharaj, what do you mean, Barack Obama? Really? He said, of course. You see, Barack Obama once said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. So next time somebody asks you, koi kuch kyun nahi karta, just quote Barack Obama to them and say, you are the ones, we are the ones we've been waiting for. There is no Messiah, it's only you. And let me give you an example of this, right? Let me give you one example which always irritates me. People say science and technology and how that defies religion and so on and so forth. Hinduism is the world's greatest argument for combining all ideas of science with all ideas of spirituality. Swami Vivekananda said famously, if by any scientific measure you cannot measure a religion, it is better that you shed that religion. You don't need it. This is not me, this is Vivekananda. If you cannot take any scientific idea and cannot measure religion through that, then you don't really need that religion. We don't want a religion of no reason. We want a religion of reason. We want a religion of science. Because remember, Hinduism is that religion where there is no Galileo Galilei. We never persecuted anybody for saying, oh well, actually, guess how the world works. Right? There is no history. In our entire history, you will never hear of anybody who was persecuted for bringing forth a scientific fact. Swami Vivekananda embraced with joy the idea of evolution long before most people in the West accepted the idea of evolution. We have never had a problem. But even today, you tell me how many young, and there were so many wonderful young children here, how many young people have been taught that long before, and this is, if you read David Mumford, the great American mathematician, he writes beautifully about this, that the Pythagoras theorem ought to be called Bodhayaна's theorem. Yes. Is there anybody who teaches this? Do your children get taught this at home or at school? No, they don't. Maybe some do, but most don't. Are they taught? In the last few years, there were questions. I mean, I remember this question in this American newspaper saying, oh, well, the Indians think they invented the zero, but can they prove it? Lo and behold, we can prove it. If any of you have been tracking this, the latest findings from the papers at Oxford, which have only recently been studied, proves once again that lo and behold, the first ideas of the application of the zero were done by the Hindus. There was a lot of laughter a couple of years ago about plastic surgery. I'm sorry, my throat is going. About plastic surgery, saying, oh my God, these crazy people are talking about plastic surgery. I mean, how can they, of course nobody knew about plastic surgery. Of course the West invented it, so on and so forth. I urge you to Google up, if you will, where rhinoplasty was first discovered. Just Google it up. You will see the first evidence, and this is fact. This is not disputed at all. The first evidence of rhinoplasty came from a place in Pune. But are any of our children, or forget children, are adults taught this? Have we ever been taught about Aryabhatta, Bhaskara? Thank you. No, absolutely not. When Manjul Bhargav won the Fields Medal, what did he say? He said his work has been greatly helped by understanding the work of Brahmagupta. How did he get to know the work of Brahmagupta? Because his grandfather was a great Sanskritist and in Jaipur, which is where he comes from. If I remember correctly, he was at a university in Rajasthan. How many Indian children know about Brahmagupta? How many Indian children even have ever heard of Brahmagupta? I like to, laugh and say in my lectures that at one point the Hindus built Vijayanagar, then they built Shastri Bhavan. If anybody has been to Delhi, you will see that of all the beauteous things that we could have built, we built Shastri Bhavan. What happened to our aesthetics? What happened to it? What happened to our sense of beauty? What happened to our sense of understanding the natural world? How is it that we keep saying the water is divine and we worship the river as divine? What happened to the rivers in that country? What have we done to our own civilization? And why do we have such a shallow understanding of our own civilization? And it is only by re-understanding or re-skilling ourselves in understanding our own civilization that we will finally come to understand who we really are. Again, at the Ramakrishna Mission, a great monk once told me that there are only 3 questions worth answering in Hinduism. Only 3. Hinduism has only 3 questions worth answering. Who am I? What do I want? And what is my purpose? Most of us, ordinary people like you and me, will not even answer the first one in our lifetime. That's why we go through many lifetimes. We will not answer even the question, who am I? Right? If you answer all 3, then you're Ramakrishna Paramahansa, you're Ramana Maharishi, you're Swami Vivekananda, whatever. Right? But there are only 3 questions worth answering. We are usually always stuck at who am I? And we haven't found that answer. Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, as somebody said. And it's sung, by the way, every day at the Vedanta Center. Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. We did not sing Satyam Jnanam Anantam, unless you agree with me, I'm going to kill you. We said Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. And I'm so delighted at that point Subramanian Swami has walked in, because who knows whether